Hi, Shanda. It's nice to see you again.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm doing okay.
You're doing okay?
A little better day.
Okay, well, good. Well, thank you for coming in today. It's nice to have you back. So what we're going to do today, since this is our second session, I kind of explained last week how we would treat each session. So for this week, we're going to start out with scales, and that's pretty much what I do to measure how your week was. So I know I asked you last week, after I had gotten your evaluation, on a scale of 1 to 10, how depressed were you feeling? And so this week I'm going to ask you the same thing. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most depressed you've ever been, 1 being not depressed at all. How was your week this week?
Probably about a 7.
Okay.
A little better than last week, but...
Okay, a 7. Is that something that you would say you're feeling right now? Or since you've been here, or today, has it been higher or lower or about the same?
It might be a little lower.
Okay.
But overall, I would probably say 7 really sums up kind of my week.
Okay. I know last week it was a little higher. You were at an 8. Was there anything this week that kind of made it drop a little?
Honestly, I think after our last session, whenever you challenged me to, I'm trying to think of the words you used, just kind of like focus, like when something was happening, like recognize whenever, like certain things that were like triggers or something for depression. So I think that kind of helped me a little bit because it helped put it in perspective, like, oh, this is the moment we were talking about.
Awesome.
So that might have been a contributing factor to me being able to go down to 7 for this week.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad that has kind of made a difference. As I know you're kind of talking about your homework. So since you mentioned that, can you give me kind of an update on this last week and how it's been for you? And then we can kind of talk about your homework and how that worked out for you.
Oh, yeah. So, like I said, whenever you gave me the homework of just finding that moment whenever I started to, beginning, a sulking process or, rather than, just shutting off, there was kind of a little thing that popped up, like a light bulb or whatever, like, hey, this is when I need to stop this mindset, kind of understand it. Not fully grasp it, but more than what I've done in the past. Because normally I just kind of, hey, this is normal. Let me just eat another 10 chocolates, as opposed to why do I keep eating when I'm not hungry? So I think it was extremely helpful with some of my times whenever I tried to start that sulking process or just hard times. So I did enjoy it because I was kind of like, here I go again. But I think it was a starting point. I really think that was helping.
Awesome. That's really great to hear. And as we go through this therapy process, I really see you being able to acknowledge those thoughts and challenging them, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. So real quick, I'm going to just explain the agenda for the day.
Okay.
So we are going to review your homework, even though you've mentioned it a little bit already. I kind of want to go just a little more in depth. And then we're going to prioritize the goals that we've listed from last week and see if those are still the same, if you want to discuss them in a different order, or what. This is totally up to you and how you're feeling today in comparison to last week. I know things can change sometimes. And so then we're going to discuss one of your problems today. If you have more that you come up with, we can definitely add that to the list. But for today, we're probably only going to have time to focus on one. And then we'll we'll pick the most important one to you, and then we'll move on next week to the other ones. Does that sound okay?
Mm-hmm. That sounds fine.
Okay. So then after that, I'm probably going to give you some new homework assignments. And since you mentioned last week that it's already starting to make a difference, I really think this next week could be helpful to you. And then we're pretty much going to just go over everything that we talked about today, just kind of summarize, make sure we're both on the same page. And then I'm going to ask you for some feedback, such as, did we cover everything you wanted to today?
Okay.
Does that sound okay?
Sounds great.
Okay. So for your homework, you mentioned that, it did kind of give you the awareness to acknowledge, when you were sulking, as you mentioned, or when you were, eating chocolates and things like that. So, to review real quick about CBT, it's your thoughts that can change your emotions, and your emotions is what makes you react or behave in a certain way. So, last week we talked about your thoughts and how they were pretty negative. They weren't, they definitely weren't positive, and they definitely weren't helpful, So the first step is acknowledging those, and then kind of placing your emotions in that moment. Like, how are those thoughts making you feel? So you can acknowledge them. So this last week, and then later on how that makes you behave. But this last week we talked about you, for your homework, acknowledging those thoughts. So how were you able to do that? And were you able to separate your thoughts from your feelings?
As far as separating, that still seems sometimes difficult. I might understand that it's a mindset is more of the thought, but sometimes I feel like they coincide. So it's difficult for me to always do that. I would say I probably struggle with separating them all the time. I think I did have some more awareness with it, but as far as being able to completely separate them, I probably still need to, figure out how to do it. Just understand it. I think the more and more I do it, probably the better I'll get at it, since I'm just one weekend. But I think that's something I really should work on, is separating the two.
Yeah, and it really is difficult to separate them sometimes. I have a lot of clients who come in, and they'll say, when I ask them, what was that thought? They say, well, I thought that, they were making me sad. And I'm like, well, that's actually an emotion. And it is hard to separate those, especially when you're in that mindset, like you mentioned. So, yeah, I'm definitely not expecting you to be a professional at this point. You have only had a week. So the fact that you're just, that you were able to acknowledge when you were having those thoughts or feelings is a really good start. So I'm glad. Do you think that homework was helpful to you?
Oh, I definitely think so.
Okay, good. Okay, so now let's kind of talk about your goals. I know one goal last week that you mentioned was to just kind of feel better about yourself. Feel better about you as a mom, as a woman, just as an individual, to feel better. Do you have any other goals that you would like to work on?
I don't know. I feel like if once I get to the point that I feel just better about myself, then that will just be able to help everything else. That'll help me be a better mom or a better wife. Just help me overall. Just having the inside and being at peace and being able to have confidence back all the time. I've realized that I've stressed myself out with so much other things rather than just focusing on one thing. Just being overwhelmed with too many variables that I can't control. So I guess, if I could just keep on working on myself first, and then hopefully my kids will see a change, and they'll, nothing drastic, but just they'll see me happier more often. You know, they'll see me more proud of them all the time. You know, they'll just see I'm more like level all the time. You know, just enjoying, like really enjoying everything, not just going through motions sometimes.
Okay. So what I heard you say is that, you know, kind of focusing on this one goal will be helpful to you in kind of all the areas of your life. But then I heard you mention enjoying life and enjoying, you know, whether that's life as a mom or just life in general, enjoying life. So I think if you're okay with that, I might write that down as a goal because sometimes depression can really take away that enjoyment of life that we have. So, so if that's okay with you, if that's something that you're interested in doing, I'm going to write that down as our second goal, unless you would like to work on that first. But as you mentioned, the feeling better about yourself could play into a lot of that. So does that sound okay for your goals?
Yes, I agree with that.
Okay, I'm going to write this down real quick. Enjoying life in general. Okay, awesome. So let's talk about your depression. Can you tell me of some of the thoughts that you had this week? I know you might not be able to remember all of them, but really any thoughts that you can remember that you had that made you feel sad, or even if you didn't notice in the moment that you're feeling sad, you kind of just remember being down. Can you think of any of those thoughts? Or just instances, and then maybe we can discover the thoughts that you were having.
Okay. One thing that happened, which I know it's kind of a mom thing in general, but just fixing dinner or something for my middle child's my picky child. But I gave it to him, and he just was like, I want something else or something with it. And at that moment, I just was like, I've done, I've tried to give you everything that you need, on your plate, so trying to find that he is not upset. He just is a kid and he wants more options whenever I'm trying to be the healthy mom, or this was something I saw, on social media that's a good start for them to get all their nutrients in for the day, so I was so proud of myself for like making this really wholesome meal for him, and he wanted nothing to do with the healthy stuff, He wanted to get to the cookies, or so just trying to realize that just because it looks good on something else doesn't mean it's going to be like a smooth, because I just, was expecting it just to go like perfectly, like he was going to eat it and it was going to be great, and then I can, be like, yes, I fed him a great meal, like something that had his veggies in it and fruits, and kind of backfired a little bit, so it's kind of upsetting for a second, but then understanding, that's when that homework came into play of, this is not me, it's not okay to just be upset. Like, we can start introducing foods maybe in smaller quantities, not like a whole new plate, but I just tried to go for it all, and that's where my homework helped me, realizing maybe I should not set expectations so high and then be discouraged when they don't go exactly how I think they should go.
Yeah. So one of the things that I heard you say in that was that you kind of expected it to go perfectly, and it didn't. You said it backfired. Do you remember last week when we talked about cognitive distortions?
Briefly, I don't remember like all of it. I remember just touching on it.
Okay. So cognitive distortions, or another kind of easier way to remember it is by calling it thinking errors. So that is when, there's different categories for it, but it's when you're having thoughts that are, they're they're unhelpful thoughts. There's different types of thinking errors. Some are black and white thinking, like thinking I have to be the best mom or I'm a terrible mom. That's kind of black and white thinking. There's also one called an unreal ideal, and that's something that I'm kind of hearing you mention briefly in some of the stuff that you're saying, and that's kind of when you're making comparisons between, like you mentioned, social media. So wanting to kind of follow in their footsteps and thinking that it's, you had the right thought process and thinking that it was maybe what was best for your children, but then thinking that it would go smoothly and everything would be fine. So we'll kind of get into that a little bit more, but how did that make you feel when he, do you remember the emotions that you felt when he said he didn't want it, he wanted something else, and do you remember how that made you feel in the moment?
I felt like kind of like I wasted my time, or I was kind of just upset. More not even like with him, just at myself. Like, why did you try something different? Like you knew this wouldn't have worked. Like why'd you put so much time into it? And just focusing on him. I don't know. I mean, it wasn't. I want to say like anger, but it wasn't towards him. It was more like anger within me. Like, this is why you shouldn't try something new. So like discouraged, I guess is more of what it was. More of I was discouraged with the result. Like, I think it's just should be one of those things where I don't have a whole thing laid out in my mind of how something should happen, because when I do that and it never happens like that, that's whenever it hurts me even more. Like I should just, I want to be prepared, and I want to be prepared for all the outcomes, and that's just not possible. And so it kind of overwhelms me, and then that's whenever I feel like I'm kind of spiraling, and just trying to catch myself, just by understanding that I can't control everything, and I can only control what I can control. But that's really difficult for me as a mom in that aspect, because I want to be able to be helpful for them. I want to do what's best for them, but I can't make all their choices for them. Like they're going to have to make a mistake on their homework sometimes, like, so just things like that. But just more of just upset with myself for letting it go so far in my mind, before it even happened.
Okay, so you gave me a lot of information, and that's great, because you're helping me show you what CBT is kind of about. So you mentioned some feelings that you were having, upset. You said discouraged. You mentioned overwhelmed, and those are great feelings. Great feelings. So the other things that you mentioned though were things like it was a waste of time. You're trying to do what's best for them. You kind of felt that you were letting it go further in your mind before actually having the moment in reality. And so do you see the difference in those being the first things that I mentioned being the emotions, and those other ones being the thoughts that you were having, and kind of how those thoughts make you feel? Do you see the relationship?
Yes. Well, as you break it down, it's a whole lot easier for me to understand you saying it rather than me just trying to separate them. Like the example really helps.
And you're not the therapist, so it's okay for you not to know these things now. It's my job to teach you so that you can be aware. So when you are feeling, these overwhelm upset or discouraged emotions, you know, sometimes it's easier for us to recognize the emotions first and then remember, why am I feeling this way? You know, what went through my head that's making me feel upset or overwhelmed or sad? And that's when you can really focus in on the thought, because once you realize the thought, that's when you can challenge it and create something positive out of it, so that way you can have a positive emotion and a positive behavior. So, you know, what you said to me today was very helpful in this process, I think, for you. And I know that these situations are hard, even if they don't seem like, you know, they don't seem like something that you off the top of your head thought you were going to talk about today. Mm-hmm. But it made you feel a certain way. And so it is good that these everyday life situations are ones that you can take control of in your mind and change your way of thinking. So for this next week for homework, I'm going to have you, so I really want you to start acknowledging your thoughts in correlation to, but separate from, your emotions. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, so what I'm going to have you do is like have a journal or, you know, some random pieces of paper that you can find at the end of the week when you come back to see me. And I want you, when you have an emotion that you're recognizing, I want you to write down the thought behind it. Because next week, we can go into more of challenging those thoughts. But for this week, I want you to see the difference between the thoughts and the emotions. Because once you pinpoint that thought, we're going to challenge it together. And then once we challenge it together, you're going to take it home and you're going to challenge yourself on your own. And then eventually you're not going to have therapy anymore. And you're going to be able to challenge those thoughts all on your own without me reviewing it the next week. And that's the goal in terms of you feeling better about yourself. And can you see how those are all related? Mm-hmm. Okay. So yeah, that's what I'm going to have you do for your homework this week. Do you think that's something that you can do?
Oh, yes.
Okay. And so really just trying to separate those. And if you can't, just write down some of the things that are happening, like the situation that caused it, how you're feeling, and then maybe together we can look back and try to figure out those thoughts, okay? Okay. Well, we're almost out of time, so I'm just going to summarize a little bit what we talked about today, so that way we know we're both on the same page, okay? So we did your scales at first. You mentioned you being about at a 7 on your level of depression for this week, and that's pretty high, but not as high as it has been. So that's great to see. Seems like your homework really helped you last week in kind of just being aware of the thoughts that you're having, but not as much maybe separating those feelings, which is fine. Honestly, just acknowledging them is a huge, huge step. So you did a really great job with that. Then we set your goals. We set your first goal of feeling better about yourself, and we can go more into what that's going to look like. And then we talked about adding enjoying life in general, because sometimes depression kind of takes away that enjoyment of life. And then we discussed, you know, your depression and that being your problem number 1 that you want to work on, and how, you know, working on that can most likely turn around these goals that we have for you. And then we talked about your new homework, which is going to be what? Can you tell me?
Separating thoughts from my feelings.
Your thoughts from your feelings, and writing those down, and then if you can bring those in next week, so that way we can really take a good look at it, and making sure and that you can separate those. And then next week we can go more into challenging the thoughts and challenging them together, so that way eventually you can challenge them on your own. Does that sound accurate? Do you have anything else that I missed that we discussed today?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right. Do you have any feedback from me? Did we cover everything you wanted us to cover?
I think so. I think definitely we covered things. I'm kind of excited about my journal of separating the two, kind of a forward process. That way you can maybe get more insight of what's going on in my mind, so we can kind of tackle it together.
Yeah.
So
that's the
that's
goal.
encouraging.
That's what we want to do. So work together to tackle that. So one day you can do it all on your own. And I'm really pleased with how you've already been doing. It's kind of sometimes a longer process for some. So you're really on the right track, and I look forward to reading your journal next week so we can challenge those thoughts together. So, Shanda, I will see you next week, and I really hope you have a good week, and I hope that our time together is always helpful to you.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, have a good day.